This happened a few years ago to a guy named Mark who loved hiking in the dense forests of Oregon. One weekend, Mark decided to explore a lesser-known trail deep in the woods, a place locals whispered about but rarely visited after dusk. As the sun started to set, Mark realized he had lost track of time. He was still miles away from the trailhead and decided to turn back. The forest, once peaceful and inviting, now felt cold and oppressive. The shadows grew longer, and the sounds of wildlife faded away. Suddenly, he heard something that didn't belong, faint footsteps following his own. But when he stopped and looked behind, there was no one there. Uneasy but trying to stay calm, Mark picked up his pace. Then he saw it, a figure standing between two trees, partially hidden but unmistakably watching him. It was tall, hunched slightly, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Mark froze in place, heart pounding. The figure didn't move but seemed to shift slightly, as if observing him carefully. He pulled out his phone to take a picture, but the screen went black. When he looked up, the figure was gone. Shaken, Mark rushed back to his car, but the unsettling feeling didn't stop there. Over the next few days, he noticed strange things, unexplained noises in his apartment, cold drafts that moved through closed rooms, and shadows flickering just out of sight. One night, he woke up to find the same glowing eyes staring at him from the corner of his room. The figure never spoke or moved, just watched. Mark's friends say it might have been a creature of folklore, something that lurks on the edges of the forest, waiting for those who wander too far. Since then, Mark avoids that trail completely. He warns others to be careful and never to underestimate the things that hide in the dark woods. This is the real story of Josh, a night shift security guard working in one of the tallest office buildings in Chicago. It was a regular Thursday night, and Josh was doing his rounds alone. The building was mostly empty, except for a few late workers and cleaning staff. Around midnight, Josh was heading back to the security office when the elevator suddenly stopped between the 13th and 14th floors. The lights flickered, and the emergency alarm sounded briefly before cutting out. He pressed the button to call for help, no response. His phone had no signal. Josh was trapped. Minutes passed, then he heard faint whispering sounds from the elevator speaker. At first, just random murmurs, but then clear words. "Help me, don't leave me here." The voice was female, desperate and chilling. Suddenly, the elevator jolted violently, and the temperature dropped sharply. The air felt thick, and Josh saw a mist begin to form in the small elevator cabin. Out of the fog, he glimpsed a pale woman wearing an old-fashioned dress, her eyes dark and hollow. She didn't say anything, just stared silently. Josh's heart pounded as he tried to stay calm. The elevator lights flickered faster, and the ghostly figure moved closer, her cold breath freezing the air. He could hear her sobbing softly now, like someone trapped in pain for decades. Hours seemed to pass, but it was only about 45 minutes before the elevator jerked back to life and opened on the 14th floor. The woman vanished instantly, and the temperature returned to normal. Josh ran out and reported the incident, but security cameras showed no one else was in the elevator besides him. Later, Josh learned that in the 1920s, a woman tragically died in that same elevator shaft under mysterious circumstances, and her restless spirit has been cited by many night workers since. Josh never worked the night shift again, but he still gets chills thinking about the cold presence trapped with him in the dark. It happened to Emily, a college student living in a quiet town in Vermont. One night, she decided to stay late in the university library to finish a big project. The campus was nearly empty, and the silence was heavy, the perfect setting for something chilling. As the clock struck midnight, Emily noticed the lights flickering repeatedly. She shrugged it off as a technical glitch, but soon realized the lights weren't just flickering. They were dimming and brightening rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. The old library, built over a century ago, had many strange rumors attached to it, but Emily never believed any of them until that night. While deep in concentration, she suddenly heard footsteps echoing in the empty hall behind her. She turned around. No one was there. Then the whispering started, soft voices calling her name from the dark stacks. Heart pounding, she packed up quickly, but found the library doors locked tight. Her phone had no signal. Trapped and terrified, Emily decided to head toward the emergency exit, but as she moved through the aisles, books started falling off the shelves by themselves, as if pushed by unseen hands. She could see faint shadowy figures at the edges of her vision, disappearing whenever she looked directly at them. Finally, after what felt like hours, the emergency exit door creaked open on its own. Emily ran outside, gasping for fresh air. She never returned to the library after midnight again, but she says the voices still follow her sometimes, whispering her name in the dead of night. Jake, a night shift security guard at an abandoned hospital in Detroit, never expected his job to become a nightmare. The hospital had been closed for years, but local legends said it was haunted by patients who never left. On his third night, Jake was doing his routine rounds through the dimly lit corridors when he heard faint crying coming from the old maternity ward. Curious but cautious, he approached the room. As he entered, the temperature dropped drastically. His breath turned to mist. Suddenly, the sound of a rocking chair creaking echoed through the room, even though the chair was empty. Jake's flashlight flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. Heart racing, he switched to his phone's light, only to see a pale figure of a woman holding a baby, standing silently in the corner. He tried to call for backup, but his radio was dead. The woman slowly lifted her head, revealing hollow, dark eyes staring right through him. Jake stumbled back, tripping over something, a small baby shoe, wet and cold. The crying grew louder, now all around him. Panicking, Jake ran through the endless hallways, the hospital seeming to shift and twist like a maze. He finally burst through the main entrance as dawn broke. He never returned, but to this day, Jake says he still hears that chilling lullaby echoing in his dreams. Emily had always loved exploring forgotten places. When she heard about the abandoned mental asylum on the outskirts of Vermont, she couldn't resist a midnight visit. The asylum was shut down decades ago after reports of strange deaths and disappearances. As Emily stepped inside, the heavy scent of mildew and decay hit her. The walls were covered with peeling paint, and shattered glass crunched beneath her boots. She pulled out her flashlight and began wandering the long, silent halls. Suddenly, she felt a cold breeze brush past her despite all windows being boarded up. Up ahead, she noticed a door slightly ajar, leading to what was once the electroshock therapy room. The air inside was thick, almost suffocating. As she entered, Her flashlight flickered violently before dying completely. In the pitch black, she heard faint whispers, patients' voices echoing, calling out for help. Panicked but determined, Emily switched on her phone light and spotted an old wheelchair facing the wall, slowly rocking back and forth. She approached it cautiously when a sudden loud bang echoed through the corridor, making her jump. The whispers grew louder, turning into anguished cries. Suddenly, she felt a cold hand grip her shoulder. Spinning around, no one was there. The room's temperature dropped, and an unseen force pushed her backward. She stumbled into the hallway, where she caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure darting past. Emily ran toward the exit, but the asylum seemed to twist unnaturally, hallways extending endlessly. Every door she tried was locked. After what felt like an eternity, she found herself back in the therapy room. In the corner, a faded photograph of a nurse stared hauntingly at her. Her eyes seemed to move. Terrified, Emily screamed for help, her voice swallowed by the eerie silence. Just then, the lights flickered back on, and the heavy front doors slammed open. She didn't look back as she ran into the night, vowing never to return. Jessica was a senior at an old high school in a small town in New England. The school had been around for over a century, with creaky wooden floors and dim hallways that always gave off an eerie vibe, especially after hours. For years, rumors swirled about the school being haunted by a former student who had mysteriously vanished decades ago. One late evening, Jessica stayed behind after a study group to prepare for finals. As the last students and teachers trickled out, she settled into the empty library. Suddenly, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered, plunging the room into shadows before buzzing back to life. She shrugged it off but noticed something strange. The old portrait of the vanished student, who was said to have disappeared in 1953, seemed to be staring right at her. Turning to grab a book, Jessica heard faint footsteps echoing through the hallways outside. She thought maybe some janitors were still around, but when she peeked out, the halls were completely empty and silent. As she returned, a chilling cold breeze swept past her, despite the windows being shut tight. Then, she heard the unmistakable sound of whispering, soft, incoherent murmurs floating from the direction of the old auditorium. Curiosity getting the better of her, Jessica cautiously followed the voices down the dark hallway. As she neared the auditorium doors, the whispers turned into frantic crying. Pushing the heavy doors open, she was met with darkness, but the faint glow of an old film projector flickered on its own in the corner. Suddenly, a grainy black and white image appeared on the cracked screen, a young girl running frantically, looking terrified. The image was from decades ago, a scene from a lost film about the very student who disappeared. Suddenly, Jessica felt something brush her arm. Spinning around, she saw nothing but shadows. The crying grew louder, and the temperature dropped rapidly. The auditorium doors slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. Panicked, she tried to open them, but they wouldn't budge. Then, from the darkness, a pale face appeared, a ghostly figure of the missing girl, her eyes hollow and desperate. Jessica felt an overwhelming sadness and fear wash over her as the apparition reached out, mouthing the words, "Help me." Just as Jessica felt herself being pulled into the shadowy figure, the fire alarm blared loudly, the doors flung open, and the lights came back on. She bolted out, her heart pounding, never to stay late at school again. Mark had recently started a new job at an old corporate building downtown. The office was housed in a towering skyscraper that had stood since the 1920s, filled with antique furniture and dimly lit corridors that gave it a rather unsettling vibe after hours. One late night, Mark was working overtime, preparing a crucial presentation. The office had emptied out hours ago, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. As he typed away, he felt the sudden chill of a cold draft, unusual for the sealed office windows. Trying to shake off the feeling, Mark glanced at the large glass wall that separated his cubicle from the empty conference room. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a shadowy figure standing there. He blinked, and it was gone. Minutes later, the office printer started up on its own, spitting out old, yellowed pages with strange, indecipherable symbols on them. Confused, Mark tried to pull the printer plug, but it kept running. Then the lights flickered violently, plunging the office into near darkness. Suddenly, the phones in the office began to ring, all at once. Mark hesitated but picked up one, only to hear a chilling whisper, "Leave now." Panicking, he ran toward the exit, but the door to the lobby was locked tight, though it should have been open 24/7. He headed for the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. As he climbed, he heard faint typing sounds behind him, but no one was there. At the stairwell's landing, Mark saw an old coat rack. Hanging on it was a tattered, dusty coat that seemed to move on its own, as if worn by an invisible figure. He tried calling out, but his voice was swallowed by an eerie silence. Suddenly, the coat seemed to float off the rack and drift toward him, blocking his way. Heart racing, Mark remembered the building's history. A janitor had died mysteriously on this very floor decades ago. With adrenaline pumping, Mark shoved the coat aside and sprinted down the stairs. When he finally burst through the main entrance, the receptionist's desk was empty and the building was quiet, like nothing had happened. Mark never worked late again. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend picnic with friends in the Appalachian Mountains. Emma and her 3 closest friends drove out to a remote clearing deep in the forest, surrounded by towering pines and the crisp mountain air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that danced between the trees. After setting up the picnic blanket and unpacking the food, the group began to share stories and laugh. But as darkness crept in, a strange silence fell over the woods. The usual sounds of birds and insects suddenly stopped, replaced by a heavy stillness that felt unnatural. Emma noticed a faint glow flickering between the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. Curious, she walked closer with her friends to investigate, but as they approached, the light vanished. Suddenly, they heard a distant, haunting melody, like a lullaby sung by a child, echoing through the forest. Chills ran down their spines. Then one of her friends pointed out footprints, large, human-shaped but far too big to be any of them, pressed deeply into the soft earth, heading towards the picnic site. But there had been no other visitors that day. As night fully descended, the group decided to pack up. But when Emma tried to start their car, it wouldn't budge. The engine sputtered and died. The eerie lullaby grew louder, now accompanied by whispers carried on the cold wind. Suddenly, shadowy figures appeared between the trees, tall, thin silhouettes with glowing eyes, barely visible but unmistakably watching.
Panic set in.
They grabbed what they could and ran toward the hiking trail, hoping to reach the ranger's station before the unknown beings could follow. Branches scratched at their faces, the whispers turned into guttural growls, and something cold brushed past Emma's arm, like icy fingers trying to pull her back. Heart pounding, she pushed forward, urging her friends to keep running. They finally made it to the safety of the trail's entrance as the glowing eyes faded into the darkness. Shaken but alive, they never spoke of that night again, but the mountain never stopped calling to them with that eerie lullaby. Jess had been looking forward to her first date with Mark for weeks. They met through a popular dating app, and after endless texting, they finally agreed to meet at a cozy little diner on the outskirts of town. Jess was nervous but hopeful. The evening started well, with easy conversation and laughter. After dinner, Mark suggested a walk through the nearby city park, a quiet place at night, perfect for talking more. Jess agreed, feeling the night was turning magical. As they strolled beneath the dim streetlights, Jess noticed an unsettling silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just their footsteps echoing against the empty paths. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept past them, and Mark's smile faded for a moment, his eyes darting around nervously. Then, out of nowhere, a man stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. He was tall, dressed in tattered clothes, his face hidden beneath a hood. Mark froze, but Jess's heart pounded wildly. The stranger's voice was low and chilling as he whispered, "You shouldn't be here tonight." Mark quickly grabbed Jess's hand and tried to pull her back, but the stranger advanced with slow, deliberate steps. Suddenly, Jess saw something even more horrifying. Behind the stranger, faint, translucent figures began to emerge from the darkness, ghostly apparitions with hollow eyes, reaching out with clawed hands. Jess screamed and pulled Mark toward a nearby bench, but the spirits moved faster than she could imagine. The air turned icy, and whispers of long-forgotten tragedies filled the park. Mark's grip tightened, but Jess felt an invisible force trying to drag her away. In a desperate moment, Jess remembered the silver pendant her grandmother had given her, said to protect against evil. She clutched it tightly and whispered a prayer. The ghostly figures recoiled, their faces twisted in rage. With trembling legs, Jess and Mark ran through the park, the eerie voices fading behind them. When they finally burst into the streetlight's glow, the shadows vanished like smoke. They never spoke of that night again, but Jess deleted the dating app and never trusted the quiet park after dark. After years of city life, Emily decided to visit her quiet village hometown for a weekend to reconnect with family and old friends. The village was picturesque by day, rolling hills, winding dirt roads, and friendly neighbors. But as night fell, Emily would discover a darker side to the place she once called home. On the second night, Emily stayed at her grandmother's old house on the outskirts of the village. The house was rustic, with creaky wooden floors and faded wallpaper, full of memories but also shadows that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. At around midnight, Emily woke to strange noises, whispering voices drifting from outside the cracked window. Curious and a little scared, she stepped out onto the porch. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the village was silent except for those eerie whispers. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the field. A tall, thin man dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his face pale and gaunt, eyes glowing faintly red. Emily froze as he slowly began to approach, his footsteps silent against the soft earth. Her heart pounding, Emily stepped back inside and locked the door. But the whispers followed her, growing louder, turning into guttural chants. The lights flickered violently, and the old grandfather clock began to strike 13 times, each chime echoing like a death toll. Desperate, Emily grabbed her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Then, out of nowhere, the room grew icy cold. A shadow passed through the wall, a dark silhouette with hollow eyes staring right at her. She felt an invisible hand brush her cheek, cold as death. Terrified beyond belief, Emily remembered the talisman her grandmother had warned her about, a small charm blessed by the village priest, kept hidden in a drawer. She grabbed it, clutching it tight as she whispered an ancient prayer. Slowly, the shadow recoiled, the chants faded, and the eerie silence returned. When dawn broke, Emily packed her bags and left the village, never looking back. To this day, she swears the village hides secrets darker than anyone dares to speak of. It started as a dare. 5 friends, looking for a thrill, decided to spend a whole night in the old cemetery just outside their town. The place was notorious for creepy legends, whispers of restless spirits, strange lights, and disappearances from decades ago. They arrived just before sunset, armed with flashlights, cameras, and enough snacks to last the night. The cemetery was surrounded by a rusty iron fence, ancient tombstones leaning crookedly, and dead trees that scratched the sky like twisted fingers. As darkness swallowed the sky, the group settled near a large, weathered mausoleum. They joked nervously, trying to ignore the cold wind that seemed to whisper their names. But soon, the jokes faded. Around midnight, strange things began happening. One friend swore he saw a shadow dart between the graves. Another's flashlight flickered wildly, then went out completely, leaving only the sound of distant footsteps crunching on dry leaves. Suddenly, the air turned icy, their breaths visible in the cold night. One by one, their phones lost signal. Panic started to set in when faint, guttural chanting echoed from deeper in the cemetery, growing louder and closer. Trying to stay together, they moved toward the gate, only to find it locked tight, no matter how hard they pulled. The mausoleum door, which had been shut, was now slightly ajar, creaking open like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. One friend, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, pushed the door open fully and peered inside. The air was thick with decay and something worse, a lingering presence that felt hungry and angry. Then the chanting stopped abruptly. Silence pressed down on them like a weight. Suddenly, glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness around them. Not one or two, but dozens. Terrified, they ran blindly through the graves, hearing whispers and cold fingers brushing their skin. Hours later, as the first light of dawn broke, the gate mysteriously swung open. They stumbled out, shaken, some limping, all forever changed. They never spoke of that night again, but each of them swears the cemetery tried to claim their souls. It was a cold, stormy night when Emily missed her usual bus home. The rain was relentless, pouring down like sheets of glass against the cracked pavement. The bus stop was desolate, with only a flickering street lamp trying to fight off the darkness. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, shivering in the wet chill. Minutes passed like hours, and the bus still hadn't arrived. Every flash of lightning revealed twisted shadows, but Emily convinced herself it was just the storm playing tricks. Suddenly, she noticed a figure standing under the far edge of the bus shelter. A man, drenched, his face hidden beneath a soaked hood. He didn't move or speak, just stared into the empty street. Emily tried to ignore him, but an uneasy feeling crept in. The air grew colder, and the storm's howling seemed to grow louder, almost like whispers carried on the wind. Then, the man slowly turned his head toward her, revealing pale, ghostly skin and eyes so dark they swallowed the light. Frozen in place, Emily's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She tried to call out, but the storm drowned her voice. The stranger stepped closer, his soaked clothes hanging like tattered curtains. She could see now his fingers unnaturally long, curling like claws. Her phone slipped from her hand as she fumbled for it. The screen flickered and died. Desperate, Emily backed away, but the bus stop seemed to stretch farther away. The streetlights flickered out, one by one, plunging her into total darkness. Suddenly, a sharp, chilling laugh echoed around her, bouncing off the wet asphalt. The figure vanished as quickly as he appeared, but the heavy, cold breath she felt on her neck told her he hadn't left. Minutes later, when the bus finally arrived, Emily jumped on without looking back. Her clothes were soaked, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. To this day, she swears the storm was no ordinary storm, and the thing at the bus stop wasn't human. When Sarah's parents left for the village for the weekend, she was supposed to be home alone for just one night. It was a quiet, small house on the edge of town, surrounded by thick woods that seemed peaceful during the day, but unnervingly silent at night. The first few hours went by fine. Sarah watched TV, chatted with friends, and tried to keep her mind off the eerie silence outside. But as midnight approached, strange things began happening. The lights flickered for a moment, then went out completely. Sarah fumbled for her phone, but it was dead. No signal, no power. The house plunged into darkness. She lit a candle and tried to stay calm, telling herself it was just a power outage. Then, from the kitchen, she heard soft footsteps. But she was alone, or so she thought. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. She held her breath, clutching the candle as the shadows on the walls danced. A whisper came, a voice, barely audible, saying, "You're not alone. Sarah's heart pounded. She called out, but only silence answered. The footsteps stopped just outside her bedroom door. She could feel the cold breath, smell something rotten in the air. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled violently, like something or someone was trying to get in. Terrified, Sarah ran to the window to call for help, but the glass was icy cold and no sound escaped into the night. The whispering grew louder, turning into guttural murmurs coming from every corner of the house. The candle flickered out, plunging her into pitch black. In that darkness, she saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the hallway, eyes glowing faintly red. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Minutes felt like hours until finally, as dawn cracked, the power returned. The figure vanished. The house was silent again, and Sarah was left shaking, exhausted, and questioning if she had imagined it. Her parents came back, but Sarah never told them about that terrifying night. To this day, she refuses to be alone in that house after dark, convinced something came home with her parents, something that still waits in the shadows. It was one of those cold, foggy nights where the air feels thick and every shadow seems to move just a little too fast. I was driving home late from a friend's place on a remote stretch of highway. Not many cars around and no cell phone signal for miles. Suddenly, my car sputtered and died. I tried to restart it, but nothing. I was completely stranded in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but dense trees on both sides and the eerie silence of the night. I grabbed my jacket and decided to walk toward what I hoped was a nearby gas station, or at least a house. The fog was so thick it swallowed the beam of my flashlight. After walking for what felt like forever, I saw a faint light flickering in the distance. Relief rushed over me. As I got closer, I realized it was a small cabin, old, creaky, and looked abandoned from the outside. I hesitated, but I had no choice. I knocked. The door slowly creaked open, and an older man appeared. His eyes were dark but kind. He invited me inside, saying the storm was rolling in and I shouldn't be outside alone. Grateful, I stepped in. The cabin was warm, but smelled like something had died there years ago. As I sat by the fire, the man told me stories about the area, about the woods, and the disappearances that happened decades ago. I laughed nervously, thinking it was just small-town ghost stories. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The silence was crushing. That's when I heard it. Footsteps crunching on the gravel outside, slow and deliberate. The man's face changed. He whispered, "They come every night, you shouldn't be here." The door rattled violently. Something outside was trying to get in. The man grabbed an old hunting rifle from the corner and motioned for me to hide in the cellar. My heart was pounding as I descended into the darkness below the cabin. I could hear the door splintering, the things outside growling in a language I didn't recognize. The man fired shots into the night, trying to keep them at bay. Minutes passed like hours. When the dawn finally broke, the creatures vanished. The man helped me out of the cellar, his eyes serious and tired. He told me the woods were cursed, that the things outside had claimed many lives. I never forgot that night. The terror, the stranger's bravery, and the fact that some help can come from the most unexpected places, even in the darkest of nights. It was a typical Friday night, and my friends and I decided to hit one of the most popular nightclubs downtown. The place was packed, thumping bass, flashing lights, and the kind of crowd that seemed to live for the night. We were all excited, especially since it was my best friend's birthday. The night started great. Drinks, dancing, and laughter filled the air. But somewhere around midnight, the mood shifted, just slightly, but enough to make me uneasy. We noticed a group of girls at the bar who didn't quite fit in. They weren't loud or flashy like everyone else. They stood in a tight circle, whispering and glancing toward us. Curious, I tried to make eye contact with one of them, but she quickly looked away, her expression unreadable, something cold, almost empty. I shrugged it off and returned to my friends, but the feeling didn't leave me. As the night wore on, strange things started happening. My phone died suddenly, no warning, just black. When I borrowed my friend's charger, it wouldn't work. Then the music seemed to distort, almost like it was warping underwater, and the flashing lights flickered erratically. I looked back at the girls near the bar. They had disappeared. I asked a bartender if they left, but he shook his head, looking nervous. "They've been here all night," he said quietly. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed. She swore she felt a cold hand grab her wrist. We all froze, looking around, but no one was near her. The crowd was too busy dancing to notice, and the security seemed oblivious. I started seeing shadows, dark, fleeting figures slipping between people, always just at the edge of my vision. I tried to tell my friends, but they laughed it off, thinking I'd had too much to drink. Then things got worse. My best friend, the birthday girl, vanished. 1 second she was laughing beside me, the next gone. I searched frantically, but no one else seemed to see her disappear. The staff said she never came in. The security cameras showed no sign of her. It was like she was erased. I ran to the bar, desperate, and the group of strange girls reappeared. This time, their eyes glowed faintly red, and their smiles were sharp, unnatural. They whispered something I couldn't understand but felt like a curse. Panic took over. I bolted outside, gasping for air, the noise of the club muffled behind me. I never saw my friend again. The next day, the club was shut down. Temporarily, they said, but rumors spread about disappearances tied to that night. I don't know what those girls were, but I know they were not human.
And that nightclub?
It's still there, waiting for the next crowd. I warn you, if you ever feel eyes on you in a crowded place and shadows lurking just out of sight, run. Some places hide dark secrets, and not everyone who walks and leaves the same. I never thought an airplane trip could turn into a nightmare, but what happened to me on that flight is something I'll never forget. It was a late evening flight from New York to London. The plane was nearly full, but the atmosphere was strangely quiet. Maybe it was just the late hour. I found my seat near the back, next to the window, and settled in for the long flight. Shortly after takeoff, a woman in the row behind me caught my attention. She was sitting alone, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, like something out of the 1940s. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and she didn't seem to belong in the modern jetliner. But what really unsettled me was her eyes, completely black, like deep pits with no whites. I blinked and looked away, trying to convince myself it was just tiredness playing tricks. But then the flight attendants started acting strange. They avoided that woman, whispering nervously among themselves, casting worried glances her way. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered, and the plane hit some turbulence. The woman stood up slowly and walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on me. Her face was emotionless, but the air around her felt cold, like a sudden drop in temperature. I wanted to look away, but I was frozen in place. She leaned over the seat and whispered in a voice that wasn't quite human, "You shouldn't be here." Heart pounding, I tried to shout for help, but my voice was gone. Other passengers seemed oblivious, caught up in their own worlds or asleep. The plane's engines started making strange noises, low and guttural, like something mechanical was failing. Then the woman vanished, as if she never existed. I rubbed my eyes, but the feeling of dread lingered. The turbulence worsened, and the plane felt like it was descending rapidly. Panic spread in the cabin, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, but it was distorted, filled with static and eerie whispers underneath. When we finally landed safely, the flight attendants told me the woman I described was never on the flight's manifest. Security cameras and passenger lists showed no sign of her. The crew exchanged uneasy looks, admitting that several people reported strange shadows and cold spots during the flight. I've flown many times since, but that flight that night, I can't shake the feeling that something otherworldly was on board with us. Something that didn't belong to this world. Starting college is supposed to be exciting, full of hope and new beginnings. But my first day at university quickly turned into something I never imagined. Something terrifying. I arrived early that morning, carrying my backpack and all my new supplies, eager but a little nervous. The campus was huge, with sprawling buildings and long hallways, and I had to find my way to the lecture hall for my very first class. As I walked across the quad, I noticed a strange figure standing near a bench under a big old oak tree. It was a student, or so I thought. They wore a dark hoodie, their face hidden in the shadows, but something about them was off. When I glanced back, they disappeared. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just my imagination. But every time I turned a corner or stepped into a new building, I felt this eerie presence behind me. I could hear faint footsteps echoing mine, but whenever I turned around, no one was there. In the lecture hall, the professor was welcoming everyone, but I couldn't concentrate. That shadowy figure kept creeping into my peripheral vision, sometimes just a flicker of movement. My heart raced. Between classes, I tried to shake off the feeling, but in the bathroom, the worst happened. As I looked in the mirror washing my hands, I saw a dark silhouette standing right behind me. I spun around, empty stall. The cold air made my skin crawl. I rushed out, only to hear a whisper in my ear, soft and chilling. "You don't belong here."
Panic set in.
I wanted to tell someone, but I wasn't sure if I'd sound crazy. The day dragged on with that shadow constantly near me. Then, on my way out, the campus security stopped me, looking serious. "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" We had reports of a missing student last semester who vanished mysteriously. They say he was last seen wearing a hoodie, wandering these halls, the guard said. That night, I researched and found out the student had died in an accident on campus, right near that oak tree. Since then, several freshmen reported feeling watched or hearing whispers on their first day. I don't know if it was his restless spirit or something darker, but that first day changed everything for me. I still feel like he's around, waiting for the next unsuspecting student to follow.